right, we're going to get started with our final panel before lunch. This is a little bit longer as we're going to dive into many topics that are concerning the Afghans in Afghanistan. And my dear friend who worked with me in Kabul and is a fellow co-writer with me, Annie's going to moderate this for us. She's got a lot of experience there, and we really appreciate all coming out today. So thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you to everybody being here today. Thank you to both of the panels that we've heard so far. I personally found it necessary to go rehydrate with coffee after the first one. I was really moved and really appreciative of the heart and soul that people have been putting into the past, what we have all been through together, and of course, service in Afghanistan. Many of us civilians who serve there alongside the military feel pretty passionately as well in all sorts of ways. So it's a privilege to be here today. This panel, has a very big remit, current concerns. There are a lot of those. And I have a really great group of experts, people who have spent their lives working for better Afghanistan. And I think we will not cover all of Afghan concerns. I'll look forward to the questions and comments from the audience, but we're going to do our best. With that, and also just we're waiting on one panelist who I hope will be joining us and who will bring his own special perspective when he does. So what I'm going to do is ask each of the panelists a question, and we're going to hear from them, and then we're going to ask each of them to make a comment that's based on themes that are raised by the other panelists. That's my effort to get us to hear maybe some differences of opinion. It's really tricky in a way. The Afghan community is being asked to be unified on all things. That's really not quite possible for any group of people. It's hard for any group of people that's been to this kind of trauma and stress. So it's important that when Afghan communities disagree on topics, that we hear a lot of different opinions. That's part of what we're going through right now. So why don't I start with MP Miriam Solaimankhil, who, among her many other talents, was one of the youngest MPs elected in 2018, and who represented Afghan's Kuchi population and is a human rights activist. So I'm going to ask you the biggest and broadest question. Looking towards a future, what are the basic elements of a fair and acceptable government structure for the greatest number of Afghans?
First and foremost, thank you to Global Friends of Afghanistan for holding this event today. I think this discourse is needed, especially during a time where most of the doors are shut in our faces. No one really wants to bring up Afghanistan. No one wants to hear about the realities on the ground. How many people can we evacuate out of Afghanistan? Is this the solution? Are we trying to get everyone out and bring them to the United States? No. If you gave the opportunity, 40 million people will leave Afghanistan tomorrow, including the Taliban. No one wants to stay there. This question is extremely important, and we have to first and foremost look at the structure of Afghanistan. There's never been a government in Afghanistan that didn't either get legitimacy from either a loya jirga or a democratic election. The issue is today, most of Afghanistan is young. They're under 40. And most of the youth, from the city centers to rural Afghanistan, they prefer to elect their official through democracy over a potentially selected loya jirga. So it's really important to note that, number one. I feel like there's three points that we need to address for a successful government in Afghanistan. Number one, it needs to be inclusive, from gender to ethnic groups to religion, everything. Afghanistan is a diverse country, and its beauty is in its diversity. When I see the Taliban going into Panjshiri's homes in Panjshir and Kabul and referring them not as resistance forces, but saying, hey, you're Panjshiri, or an Andrab, saying, hey, you're Andrabi, that's why we're searching your homes. This is causing a division amongst Afghans, which is going to have a big repercussions, not only regionally, but globally. The second most important thing is the will to provide security and economic safety to the Afghan people. We need to have, right now we're seeing the Taliban struggle with this. They're able to have suicide bombers, they're able to do attacking, they're able to have an offensive, but we're seeing them struggle whenever defending their area. Not only are they not able to defend our Shia communities in Kabul and around the country, but we're seeing like the fractures amongst the Taliban. You're seeing that the leadership will tell their foot soldiers to do something or not do something, and they're not listening. So they're failing on this extremely. The third and final point that I wanted to bring up was a constitution by people of all ethnicities, all genders, all religious backgrounds, people who can have the right to elect and the right to be elected. These people come to a consensus and they build a constitution themselves. I think these are the three most important points, and I think that the youth of Afghanistan is the future. I think we need new faces in Afghanistan. I don't think anyone wants to see the warlords who destroyed Afghanistan and brought us to this point back in power again. But the 20 years invested in Afghanistan was not a waste. The 20 years brought people like Crystal Bayat and Haidari Saib and others, Alizai Saib, who will be coming too. They built these people up. They gave me an opportunity to be a member of parliament. They made millions of women educated. Crystal Bayat was a business owner. Crystal Bayat was also working in the government. She was brave enough to stand up, wrap an Afghan flag around her shoulders, and protest on our Independence Day in front of the Taliban. That's a different kind of bravery. That one protest was enough for me to stand behind this woman. And every woman in Afghanistan is the same way. Every single woman is a leader. Every single woman deserves a voice. And that was brought to us because of the last 20 years. An educated woman stops terrorism. An educated woman builds a nation. And I pray and I hope that the American people will stand behind us. And this will be the beginning of our discourse. Our compatriots all around the world are talking about what the future is looking like. And that diaspora of Afghans abroad right now, the refugees, these are not regular economic refugees, they're political refugees. And these political refugees are talking, they're deciding, okay, how can we move forward? What kind of government in exile can we build with new faces, with people who have energy and who have been brought up in a democratic, free Afghanistan that did not have any other hands meddling in it, like it does right now, as a neighboring country is controlling the Taliban presently. So I'm excited to see what the future brings. Thank you.
So much. And you've brought up some important themes that we're going to come back to. And you introduced in a way the theme of our next question, which is the neighbors. So Ambassador Haidari and I, we met more than 10 years ago when I was going to be the political counselor in Kabul, and he was the political counselor of the Afghan embassy here, so we were each other's counterparts. And he's had a distinguished diplomatic career as the #2 at the embassy in India, as the ambassador in Sri Lanka, and a number of very important posts back in Kabul. So in your exposure to the region and to diplomacy, what would you say are the goals that regional countries have for the current situation in Afghanistan, and including the ones we don't talk about as often, such as India and Central Asia? What are the ends that they're pursuing in Afghanistan, and can they be helpful to the Afghan people?
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, and I'd like to first thank Georgetown University, my alma mater, for continuing to stay engaged and supporting efforts like this, having hosted numerous conferences on Afghanistan from the very beginning when I was working with Georgetown University with President Joya. And I also admire his leadership, and I thank him for staying engaged on Afghanistan issues. Also thank the global Friends of Afghanistan leadership. Jason, you should really be an honorary citizen of Afghanistan for just doing so much. This is just a good example of your work to help remind the American people, the real allies of Afghanistan, and as well as the international community, of the need to stay the course, not just for the Afghan people, but for ensuring regional stability and as well as international peace and security consistent with the United Nations Charter to which all countries have subscribed. And as well as to the panelists here, I really cried quite a bit there, because it's one thing, like they said, to see things in a documentary or in CNN, BBC news clips, but it's another thing to really experience. Because I have experienced that, not, of course, over the past 20 years alone, but also during 1980s. And that's when I went to the US on the first scholarship for education, fleeing the Taliban the first time around, and then going to Georgetown. So I thank them, and as well as the Gold Star families. I used to be posted here at the embassy, and I used to write these letters to the parents of one or two, children who had gone to serve, at the United States and to help secure the future of Afghanistan. One of the kids spoke here, and I cried quite a bit. And I think for all families, as we know, it's difficult to lose, your loved one, but especially so for, American families, because they're so small, just one or two kids. And I saw, soldiers who were just engaged, and soldiers who had just married, and soldiers who had just had their first baby. And I used to write, because ambassadors used to sign, and then we put together those and send them to the US Congress to remind them that these sacrifices should really mean to you and your government and the future of our relationship. And those sacrifices should underpin the Afghan-US strategic partnership agreement, and as well as the bilateral security agreement, that they shouldn't be just a piece of paper that now has been trashed, unfortunately, by this administration. But more specifically to your question, our neighborhood is unfortunately predatory. And their interests in Afghanistan are really mixed. They can be positive independently, but they can be very negative when they look at their interests in Afghanistan through their hostile relationship with the United States. Think about Iran and US relationship. Think about now China and US relationship. China's out there, and US is as much after China, and we directly border China in the northeast of Afghanistan. And think about your relationship with Russia. And all of those interstate tensions in the region and outside the region, and as well as inside the region. India, Pakistan are almost at their throats every single day, and they bring those tensions in Afghanistan, and have done so over the past 20 years. And as a result, especially in the context of Indo-Pakistan relationship, in their long-standing hostility due to, unfortunately, especially Pakistan see Afghanistan unfortunately being friendly to the Indian people, traditionally so, and as well as their governments traditionally so, unfortunately as a threat to their stability and security, which they shouldn't, because they're now a nuclear power. Of course, they're one of the largest armies in the world, and much bigger than Afghanistan, population-wise, economy-wise, and especially, but that's how they see it. And as a result, they have pursued this, unfortunately, strategic depth in Afghanistan. They launched the Taliban back in '94 to exactly achieve the goal that they achieved last year, and part also because of a lack of a concrete long-term South Asia strategy on the part of many administrations in the United States. And I think Annie had many conversations in Kabul on this issue, this lack of a policy on Pakistan, which Ambassador Hossain Haqqani of Pakistan, who's not here, has termed as a transactional relationship, where U.S. has done things for Pakistan, Pakistan has done things for the United States, and we can go back to 1980s and look at how Pakistan enabled the U.S. to bleed the Soviets in Afghanistan, using Afghans, the Mujahideen, the resistance to do so. So Pakistan, unfortunately, has been the principal regional peace spoiler in case of Afghanistan. Were it not for Pakistan, not the Pakistani people, don't get me wrong, we appreciate their hospitality, we love the people of Pakistan, especially the civilian governments that have come and gone, the leadership have always, felt our pain and expressed their support, but it's the military intelligence, unfortunately, that has been, after Afghanistan and bringing the situation to where it is today. So were it not for this, of course, Afghanistan, despite all the issues in terms of weak governance, corruption, the reports of Sigar you may have read on Afghanistan, we now be a flourishing democracy in this part of the world where, with exception of India, the rest is all dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, than which, of course, if we succeeded together, then we could expect the general public in this region, and then more democracies would come up and flourish per success in Afghanistan. So now shifting to Iran. Iran has also played a very mixed role in case of Afghanistan, at times peace spoiler, at other times a constructive player, especially in the wake of 9/11. Iran was very constructive, I think they worked with the United States to establish the interim administration, but of course that axis of evil speech by President Bush, and of course the following steps that flew from that, unfortunately, pushed away Iran, and then Iran increasingly became distracted, but definitely working with the Afghan government on issues of trade and investment, exporting their fuel and as well as other commodities to Afghanistan, but also on refugees that have been mixed, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Shifting to Central Asia, unfortunately, Central Asians have always pursued a policy of containment of violence and instability in Afghanistan. The two that have been more engaged are Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Tajikistan in particular, in light of the recent years, especially since last year, they've provided some support for the Afghan resistance. Thanks to them, to the leadership, although small, but very bold when it comes to their stance in the war against terrorism and as well as extremism. Uzbekistan has hosted a number of conferences on Afghanistan with the goal of somehow helping stabilize Afghanistan if they could through economic cooperation, as well as enabling Afghanistan to realize our land bridge status between South Asia and Central Asia, so that Pakistan doesn't always rely on Russia and really opens a route to trade down to the south, meeting markets of South Asia, especially India, and as well as India up to the north through Afghanistan. Russia, unfortunately, has not been very constructive. We know they've been more or less on the side of the Taliban. Shifting to India, where I served as the largest democracy, we're thankful to Indian support. We signed this strategic partnership agreement with India in October 2011. We had really high hopes for that SPA to be implemented, not in letter, in spirit, tangibly, much like the SPA that we signed with the U.S. But there, I think the governments in India didn't do as much as they should have. And also, they haven't done as much as they should have over the past 3 years. We're not very happy with the way, unfortunately, our refugees that have been treated. In other cases, now some 5,000 students are stranded in Afghanistan, and I've been appealing to the Prime Minister. I've worked with people close to him, around them, to screen those students. If they have any security concern, put them on the planes and send them back to India to continue getting their higher education, because that's how India has really helped Afghanistan. We're thankful to them. And I'll just leave it there and then continue.
I asked you an unfairly enormous question, right? But I'm asking everyone very enormous questions today. So Ms. Fleischner, Justine Fleischner, is a conflict analyst and director of research at the Afghanistan Peace Watch, and has a background in weapons tracing. But I'm going to ask you a sort of mixed question. So if there's a belief or a call that somehow there has to be a nonviolent organized resistance to the Taliban. In other words, that civil society in Afghanistan are the ones who need to organize and push back on both the Taliban and all of these terrorist groups that are essentially finding safe harbor in Afghanistan today. What would you say to someone who says this is what needs to happen next?
Yeah, thank you so much, Annie, and thank you, Jason, for having me and for organizing this conference. And as Annie mentioned, I worked in Afghanistan between 2018 and the collapse, leading weapon tracing investigations with ANDSF. So very kind of specific work on Taliban weapon supply lines, Islamic State weapon supply lines. And so that's how I was introduced in the Afghanistan context, and just made wonderful friends and allies particularly with the security forces. Following the collapse, I transitioned to a leadership role at an organization called Afghan Peace Watch, which is tracking not just weapons, but violence incidents in all of Afghanistan, including violence against women, domestic abuse, which is something that I think Crystal and Miriam, and we can touch on a bit more, targeting of ANDSF, targeting of journalists, targeting of any type of civil society activist. And so this notion that there can be effective nonviolent resistance to the Taliban from inside Afghanistan is a very difficult idea to expect to gain any traction. I think the other important aspect of this from a US perspective is that engagement with civil society, empowering civil society, is one of the main soft power tools we have as a country to combat violent extremism. And now we're in a situation in Afghanistan where we have different Taliban factions, different Islamic State factions, other terrorist groups being used as proxies, as insurance policies against other proxies. And so the notion that you could simply have Afghan civil society effectively mobilized from inside Afghanistan is not possible. That said, I think all of us on this panel and so many of the Afghans in here are still deeply interconnected with activists, with journalists inside Afghanistan. And so finding ways that we can collect and verify information and then present that so that it can have an impact on policy, that's one of the core missions of Afghan Peace Watch, and of a lot of the activities that we're collectively engaged in. Because whether you're talking about women and the domestic violence risks that they're facing currently, or you're talking about ANDSF being put into a position where they're essentially forced into recruitment into any one of the multitude of terrorist factions that are operating, this requires engagement. It requires a strategy and a plan. It requires organizing outside of Afghanistan, investing in technology, investing in tools that can allow us to connect and understand the ground situation, the ground realities, and empower those civil society that we believe in, that we've invested in over the past 20 years to act as an effective counterbalance to the Taliban. And again, I think this is something that was missing throughout the negotiation process, is putting the young people of Afghanistan, the ones that share our values, want democracy, want education, want to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, so on and so forth, putting them face to face with the Taliban and allowing them to advocate for the future of their country. I think the other piece of this, looking at this as a security expert, there are so many internal divisions within the Taliban right now. The Al-Qaeda connection that I think the administration kind of hoped wouldn't surface, at least until after elections, has become clear as day. And so there needs to be a strategy, there needs to be a plan. If we expect there to be a nonviolent way forward, then the US really has a responsibility and an obligation to facilitate that. And so I think we have lots of ideas collectively, but just supporting each other and moving in this direction so that there can be an effective counterbalance to these completely false narratives that the Taliban is peddling about what Afghans want, what Afghan culture is, what Afghan society is. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. But I can also say after a really tough year where I think a lot of us were dealing with a lot of grief, there's a lot of hope and optimism that this situation will not stay the same forever. And that if we start galvanizing each other now, there can be progress made in this space in the years to come. And certainly, most of us are in our 30s, 25. Certainly in our lifetimes, there'll be a lot of major changes. Thank you.
So much, and we're very lucky to have our final panelist join us, but before we ask him a question, I'm going to turn to Ms. Bayat. So again, thank you. It's been described what your personal heroism and stepping forward has cost. But I want to ask you maybe a question about allies. So given the Taliban's view that we heard from Special Representative Bennett, that they are simply not bound by international human rights conventions, and that there are these extreme physical limitations being placed on women who want their rights, what do you see as any sources of support for Afghan women right now, either inside the country or from the outside?
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you, Jason, for organizing this event. We all Afghan are grateful for your hard working towards Afghan and supporting Afghans in their hard times. Before coming to the main point of this question, I just want to point to that how hard was it for Afghan women to become, I can't point myself as example, but every Afghan, the new generation you see, it was their fights start within their family to get the right to education, to get the right to work, or the freedoms or the achievements that they built over 20 years. It wasn't easy. Personally, I start my fight starts with my dad because they were very conservative and they didn't allow women to go to school, while my paternal family were very liberal, supportive, and always encouraging me to get education, to go to my mom had a lot of dream for me, and I'm grateful of my mom. She's not here, but she's the champion of education for her kids, and she built me. She gives me hope that I become, and it's not only my mom, it's the million mom that they built this generation. And it was unbelievable for every Afghan. I don't want to talk only about women because I think 40 million, whether men or women, they are suffering under this tyrannic regime in Afghanistan. So even if right now, if a man want to support women on their protests, because I just want to focus more on civil society and the activists, the Taliban assassinate them, they kill them, they imprison them, put in jail. Azim Azimi stand with against the Pakistan and protested, the march of protest last October, and up to last week he was in jail. So it's very hard at this particular time that we see the chances and there a very appropriate mechanism inside of Afghanistan that the men should be engaged in advocacy against the Taliban and supporting women, but hiddenly there are some ways, because when these activists are contacting me and asking me that, can you imagine we don't have money to rent a taxi to go and protest? They don't have the basic infrastructures. They don't have the money to, because most of these women and girls, they lost their father during the war. And most of these women lost their husband during the last 20 years, their husbands, and they are widow, and they're the only breadwinner. The reason they came out of their home because their children are starving. They don't have food to feed these kids, and they have to stand for their rights and for their freedoms. So I think I'm outside of Afghanistan, but my soul is inside of Afghanistan with these women, and we feel abandoned. I think that the international community turned their eye on Afghans. They don't listen to our voice. They know very well the nature of the Taliban, but still whitewashing them, giving them chance. I know it's a short time, but I just want to say the real things, that what every Afghan activist and female feel like inside of Afghanistan. We didn't see any changes in Taliban over past 4 years that we negotiate with them. And what's the hope that still we are trusting them and giving them the chance and demanding them? I don't think that there should be a demand. And there is no policy working with the Taliban. The Taliban are the first enemy of Taliban are women, because we got education and we didn't give any Talib in the society. And the reason they want uneducated women, because they can give more Talib in the society for the future of Afghanistan. So there are two ways that we can help the people inside of Afghanistan. The first thing, from outside of Afghanistan, I think the humanitarian aid should be conditionalized. They shouldn't give the opportunity for the Taliban to misuse this aid and giving to their soldiers and supporting them, empowering them, because I personally we documented through Afghan Peace Watch that the Taliban are starting building this religious school in south part of Afghanistan. And that's how humanitarian aids are misusing from Taliban's side. There should be a monitoring system in Afghanistan that where these aids are going and how they are spending. The second thing, that putting pressure on the Taliban to recognize the women's rights and their freedoms inside of Afghanistan. I mean, we launched a campaign, Ban Taliban Travel. So I don't think that we should give them more chances to travel abroad, because over past 1 year, we didn't see any changes from the Taliban side, specifically on the girls' education and women's rights in Afghanistan. And there is no need to negotiate with them until they show us the result, the outcome inside of Afghanistan, that they believe in women and they give the chances to women. And also, we can give some moral support for these women through our diplomatic relation and some organization inside of Afghanistan. As my sisters earlier in this previous panel, they mentioned that every single woman in Afghanistan is going through a chronic mental health situation. We need more organization that they can work online with these women. I mean, the therapy. I personally, when I hear the stories of these women who are suffering inside of Afghanistan, it breaks my heart. And it's very hard for me to describe in words that what situation they are going through. But coming inside of Afghanistan, I want to point that if it's hard because I understand how hard it is for men also to stand with their sisters. On education, it's very easy. If the Taliban allow these girls, the boys to go to school, they can strike. They can stand that if you don't allow my sister, we're gonna not attend the classes. We are standing with our sister. We should have equal rights. They should show the Taliban that they are standing. Nothing is powerful than the voice of a nation. So they should stand with their sister. Even for the men who are going and taking possession power in Afghanistan, they can stand. I mean, I see some people there saying like, well, I think after some time the Taliban will change or the Taliban will give these rights. That's devastating for me. It's very frustrating when I see these men that they still believe the Taliban they will give. You should stand. You shouldn't go and work. The government will collapse itself if these men stand with the women in Afghanistan. They shouldn't go and work. And for those activists who are on the front line, I mean, Julia Parsi, Laila Basim, Monasa Mubarak, the real heroes not only for Afghanistan, for the world. They are fighting not only for me and for Mariam or for our Afghan women, they are fighting for the world. So they don't have any support. They don't have money inside of Afghanistan Julia Parsi was fired last week. Laila Basim was fired from her job a month ago. They were working in a private sector, not definitely in governmental sectors. It's not allowed. The only reason because she is outspoken against the Taliban, and these organizations are afraid of the Taliban, and that's why. So imagine that they were the breadwinner of their family. What would happen with those kids? We need to support, at least if we cannot stand with them, we need to help them financially, give them the support. I can't say that they want to receive financial support, but they need the financial support. We have to, and on evacuation process, I just want to point to that. The US government is only giving the chance for SIV to come out of Afghanistan. As you served in Afghanistan, and you know most of these SIV holders are men, and they aren't women, and these heroes that they are fighting inside of Afghanistan, I think there should be a specific mechanism for these women to protect them, to bring them out of Afghanistan. We can't leave these women inside of Afghanistan until there is a surety inside of Afghanistan to protect these women. There is no protection. None of these women are sure that they will be alive after an hour. So thank you so much.
General Alizai, another distinguished member of this panel who served his country with great patriotism and served the United States as well by being a tremendous ally, and who was the final chief of staff of the Army as the last fighting was ongoing, which was still a tremendous sacrifice by so many Afghan forces. May I ask you to talk a little bit about the direct and indirect security risks to the international community that are emerging from Taliban control of Afghanistan?
Thank you, Ambassador, and thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'm really happy that I'm speaking here. Yes, so first of all, I would start it from a point that I never thought it would be that way. For the last few days, we have been circling around DC, and I'm seeing some organizations, even in DC, are doing some campaigns, and I can say lobby for Taliban, regardless of, I'm sure the memories are short, but the 9/11 I think, is not going to be forgotten for centuries. So I'm surprised a little bit because it took us hundreds of thousands of casualties in the last 20 years fighting the terrorism and Taliban. And now I see lobby. It's quite frustrating as well. But of course, Afghanistan is not in a good situation right now. Al-Qaeda is back there. Daesh is there. All 20 or 22 global terrorist organizations are activate there, including Ansarullah of Tajikistan, IMU, ATIM, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and all of them. They are all working under the umbrella of Taliban right now, as they used to in last 25 years. This is a threat. The Taliban are hosting those terrorist groups that already once attacked the international community, or specifically US. The strike on al-Zawahiri last month is a quite solid proof of Al-Qaeda is active in Afghanistan right now. But this was just one step ahead the global terrorism. The network is there. The new generation of Al-Qaeda is taking the wheels towards their future actions. But all the new generation has some serious intelligence, soft backgrounds from some of the Middle Eastern and North African countries that will become a bigger problem in the future for the entire world. From another side, Taliban taking over Afghanistan is not just limited to Afghanistan. They're inspiring all other international terrorist groups that there is a chance that they can take over some of the countries. For example, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, TTP in Pakistan. Most of them, they were just thinking in the past, like till 2021, they were just thinking that yes, this might happen. Now they are sure that this is possible, and they are working hard. It's helping their recruitment. They are finding more economic support from different parts of the world, especially from the enemies of US. If you look at Osama's, the Al-Qaeda's current appointees and appointments, and the AQIS reactions which were strike last week in Bastion of Helmand, the indications are that they are working now with Iranians, and Iranians are working with Russians, and Russians are US and West enemies. They are deploying troops to Kashmir, and India is there against China. So in that region, a very complex game, but we understand, is going on there, which is not healthy for the entire international community, specifically for the United States. The narco traffic and trade, you may know, but Ansarullah of Tajikistan is right now doing those trafficking to the Central Asia and Russia. The Afghans and Daesh, parts of Daesh and some TTPs are doing that trade to Pakistan and the Indian region. And the Taliban friction of Al-Mansur group, Mullah Mansur's group, which are Helmandi, mostly southwestern Taliban, Qayyum Zakir, Sadr Ibrahim. They are working with Abdullah bin Laden, who is son of Osama bin Laden, and they're trafficking the drugs to Iran, and the routes comes to the West. So the uranium is there, the new generation of Al-Qaeda is there, and they have doctors, they have technical people recruited already in the last 20 years. They are not the same as pre-2001. They are a new generation, and my biggest fear is that if they find hands on the nuclear weapon there in Afghanistan, based on every precursor is available there, how horrible that will look. And these organized crimes like narco traffickers will help them with such attacks. You have got enemies. US is now, I think, losing their influence in that region, an entire region. We saw Iraq a couple days ago. What happened to them? And who did this? Iranians with Russians? And still we are ignoring this. Just imagine one more country there, because I think US already lost Yemen. most of the countries in Middle East. It's just Saudi Arabia and a few small countries there. What will happen there? The South Asia, Southeast Asia, Afghanistan is gone. South Asia, East Asia, it's just India. And Central Asia, they were never with US. So US is losing influence politically, economically. It will be a nightmare for US in the next couple of years. And security-wise, it's going to be a big mess for US to control based on all the facts I just mentioned in next 2 to 3 years or 4 years. There's very little time, and there's a lot of homework to be done before the things goes out of control in that region.
Thank you very much, General. I'm reminded of some of the interviews I'm in a position to be able to give about Afghanistan, and every single time it seems an interview will say to me, oh, but it can't be that bad, or there must be some good news. And I say, no, honestly, it's just that bad, because when we make a strategic error of the gravity that we made, the United States government made last year, the implications are enormous. They're enormous for us, for future generations of the US, and obviously they are enormous right now for everybody living inside Afghanistan and the community in exile. And I want to start in our second round of conversation by underscoring the fact that this is urgent. I mean, I think you made the most, all of you, the most impressive case for the fact that these problems aren't just the kind of problems that sort of exist and take a while to manifest themselves. These are urgent problems. There is an urgency to the idea of a lost generation or half a generation. That's urgent. There are going to be urgent health crises ahead, as maternal mortality and infant mortality rates are going to skyrocket again. There's the urgency of the loss of influence by the US and other nations that are trying to combat authoritarianism in that region. There is also the urgency of all of the nuclear terrorism, other security threats that we cannot take our eyes off of, we collectively, the whole world. So there were a number of really important themes that came up in this first discussion, and what I'm going to do is turn to you again. I'm going to task you right away with another response, but I'm going to name some of the themes, and these are not the only ones, but something for us all to think about in the category of Afghan concerns: legitimacy, inclusion, solidarity and support to civil society, the bravery and the extremely difficult and fragile situation for Afghan women, the role of youth, the need for a constitutional order, the Taliban's links to terror and their inspiration to other groups around the world, the fact that most neighbors of Afghanistan are playing a predatory role, not a helpful one. The fact also that great power competition and rivalry with the United States are continuing to guide the actions of Afghanistan's neighbors. The role of soft power. If we're never going to have American troops or NATO forces or even UN forces deployed, what are the other elements of power that can be used? The imperative to help those who are in immediate danger, and also what are the roles and responsibilities of Afghans who are outside of the country with respect to the situation. So, touching on any of those, I'm going to turn to you in order. Maybe I'll give you a break, and in order of how we spoke before. So please go ahead.
I just want to start with a short little story. In 1947, Pakistan was made. The Afghan ambassador congratulated Pakistan for their inception and said, "We wish that you have a peaceful and prosperous future, and we wish the best for your people, but we cannot recognize you because the people of the tribal belt have yet to have their voices heard. They built a strategic depth policy. They stuck to that policy. And in 2022, they were able to take my flag, they were able to take my national anthem, and they're about to take my identity. What do they want to do with my identity? They want to make my identity as an Afghan obsolete and turn it into an Islamic extremist identity. In the history of the world, there's never been an insurgency to survive over 20 years without a neighboring country's support. Why is no one talking about this? Because since I came here, I've been told by numerous people, don't say the word Pakistan, don't say the word Pakistan, don't say the word Pakistan. Am I that weak now? Is it because I don't have money? Is it because I come from a poor country? I'm not allowed to say, hey man, there's 40,000 madrasas murdering my people, committing genocides. Why? Because they can't use their nuclear weapons. Those suicide bombers are worth more than their nuclear weapons. Now and say, okay, you know what? I have an issue with your policy here. I have an issue with your management of crises. I have an issue with your education policies. What's going on here? They will never say that. The Afghan nation, if they are allowed to raise their voices, will sit there and appease the Taliban just because it's their life on the line. They will be killed tomorrow. One man, Azim Azimi, stood up and said, you know what? Why is the Pakistani NSA sitting here and meddling in our government openly? It was a peaceful protest. He put up the Afghan flag. There was no weapons. There was no looting. Before they even hit the streets, for 10 months, the man was imprisoned and he was missing. The only reason we know he's free now is because he put a picture of a dove on his Twitter. To think that this is just about Afghanistan is naive. To see that Washington, D.C. has no plan for Afghanistan is naive. We need to get our act together. We need to have monitoring on the ground. We need to see what's going on. We need to empower the youth. There's boys up there that were pilots and soldiers, young boys, 2021. They didn't plan to leave. I spoke to them today. I said, what are you guys going to do here? Where are you going to live? What's your work? Did you get a scholarship yet? I was excited. I was trying to help these guys. They said, we're going to go back. We don't want American boots back on the ground. We want Afghan boots back on the ground. We want our army to go back. Alizai has commanded the special forces, the most talented special forces in the world, and I've seen them with my own eyes. He's commanded them. We had women. Who made up, I was part of the Defense Commission of Parliament. Who made up the female part of the army? Let me tell you about that. It was majority widows of soldiers. And when they signed the dotted line to join the army, they didn't do it for money. They did it, they knew they were signing their death certificate. They wanted to die for that country. These people were not fighting for Afghanistan. They were fighting against Islamic extremism. They were fighting against corruption. They were fighting to keep you guys safe at home. They were fighting to keep me safe. They were fighting for Crystal. They were fighting for yourself. They were fighting for Justine to be able to map the illegal trade of weapons. I beg you to write to your congressmen, to your representatives. This is going to affect all of you guys. Matt Zeller, he said in an interview, he said, he was a soldier, a special forces soldier in Afghanistan. And he asked his interpreter that was with them, he said, why have you protected me so many times? You've saved my life numerous times. How? Why? He said, with my mother's prayers. He said, then how is that Talib fighting me? He's from your same village. He's Pashtun too. What's going on? He said, he has his mother's prayers too. He said, but the difference is that my mother is literate and his mother is illiterate. My mother can look at the Quran and see what it actually says and raise this right, while his mother was illiterate and she was brainwashed into thinking a certain way. Women's education, women's empowerment, every woman, any woman who is Afghan and who raises her voice, we need to stand behind her. So again, I pray and I hope that you guys all stand behind us, open the doors of Washington, D.C. Let's make a plan. Let's work together. Let's be a team. Because this is Islamic extremism. It's not a joke. Thank you again.
Very much. Ambassador.
Well, thank you. Of course. Mariam is very eloquent and very passionate because she's seen things, and when you see things, then that's the passion that you speak with. I completely agree with what she said on the role that Pakistan played, and the whole world watched, and the Security Council watched. I recently wrote an op-ed, the title is "The World Failed Afghanistan." It did so because the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Secretariat had been watching, of course with the member states, principal the United States, the Biden administration, that Pakistan had been taking Afghanistan inch by inch, as the Trump administration and the Biden administration had been negotiating directly with the Taliban, excluding the elected government of Afghanistan, the elected leader of Afghanistan, and the voices of the Afghan people, the parliament, and the women, more than half of our population. Imagine which country can achieve those global sustainable goals without half of its population? I see this issue of more women more as a strategic issue on the part of Pakistan, because by sidelining, excluding half of our country's population, Afghanistan could never hope to achieve independence and positive sovereignty per United Nations Charter. Unfortunately, the world watched, and the United States, the Biden administration, not the American people, not those thousands of veterans like Jason's who fought there, failed there alongside their Afghan brothers and sisters, but this administration, a democratic administration, colossally betrayed a developing democracy. We started here the works of Jack Snyder at Georgetown University at the School of Foreign Service. The democracy is a process. Switzerland doesn't happen, or the United States just doesn't happen. It takes time. You need to invest in this process. And we saw what these administrations did, unfortunately. I was here in Washington to see the timetables, for example, under the Obama administration. We seen troops surge, and then we pulled them out. While the generals had been writing report after report, strategy after strategy, especially the strategy by General McChrystal, which talked about the interference from Pakistan. If Pakistan wants to do this, we need to go inside Pakistan in hot pursuit to go after the havens. We don't need to fight in Afghanistan. That's the wrong fight. That's the wrong war. The right war is in Pakistan. This ideological, insecure, young state, unfortunately, that has always been after Afghans' lives. Well, we are firmly committed time and again to non-interference under the UN Charter. And unfortunately, last year, it was also for the first time that the United Nations Charter was completely trashed. Everyone watched that charter being violated by Pakistan through its proxy to invade and occupy Afghanistan. And that's how we consider Afghanistan, under occupation, in gross violation of the United Nations Charter. And of course, inaction on the Chapter 7 of the Charter when it comes to acts of aggression. There's a specific provision, and that's how the United States and its allies went to Afghanistan in the first place, and of course activated this on other cases in the world. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I also want to go back to China. I didn't comment on that last time I discussed other countries. China, unfortunately, we know it is in a competition, sometimes healthy, sometimes unhealthy. We heard the general talking about all these geopolitical major power rivalries. We discourage Afghans that. That has been always our core foreign policy. We encourage cooperation against confrontation, knowing that so long as the United States, even sending forces and again increasing aid to Afghanistan, remains in this kind of confrontational relationship with China, Russia, and of course their allies when it comes to China-Pakistan relationship, or Iran. Unfortunately, the United States wouldn't be able to stabilize Afghanistan. We time and again under President Karzai and President Ghani, appeal to the United States and our neighbors to keep their differences, strategic differences, out, because at the end of the day, it's in their best shared long-term interest for the United States, the West Bloc, and as well as the East, fast rising for an Afghanistan that's free from terrorism, extremism, drugs, and now the adverse effects of climate change that is decimating Afghanistan. Is the most, I also had the honor of serving as the Director General of the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, covering 2 billion population of South Asia. And the world, South Asia is the most vulnerable region to the adverse climates of change. And South Asia, in turn, it's Afghanistan that is unfortunately the most vulnerable to climate impact. So think about this 40 million young population losing everything these days to these flies. Who recruits them? Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and a number of other terrorist groups under the wing of the Pakistani army and intelligence, which they have been using now for decades to milk the United States for, all sorts of resources as a transactional, ideological, insecure state in this part of the world. So we need to work together with major powers around Afghanistan. When it comes to stabilizing Afghanistan, the U.S. did, make some reach out through special envoys, but unfortunately, that was not enough because the plan was really to abandon Afghanistan, to betray Afghans, and to betray democracy in Afghanistan. So that's why those reach-out efforts to Russia and China and Iran were not enough. Especially Iran is very important. I think I'm happy to see these days that U.S. and Iran are making some progress on the nuclear deal, that if that comes to fruition, then Iran could be a lot more helpful. When it comes to countering terrorism, when it comes to countering drugs, Iran itself has 4 million drug addicts fed by drugs from Afghanistan. And I think drugs is very important. General also pointed out, drugs produced in Afghanistan are increasingly the Taliban are into methamphetamine. Is worth between $50 to $350 billion. So you see in Afghanistan what has converged is internal challenges, regional challenges, and transnational challenges, which I call this vicious cycle of insecurity in Afghanistan that is foremost affecting, victimizing Afghans, but definitely destabilizing the region and as well as the rest of the international community. Here at Georgetown, at the School of Foreign Service, we studied this, traditional, new and emerging problems in the world, and especially security threats. And all of them are in Afghanistan. We have traditional security challenges. We have new now with the Taliban, and then emerging climate impact acting to that, destabilizing Afghanistan, the region, and the rest of the world. And that's why the United States must lead on these issues very constructively, not in a zero-sum in competition with China or in competition with Russia, but working with them, at least when it comes to Afghanistan, to help stabilize Afghanistan. Thank you.
Very much. That's a complex picture that everybody is adding to, and I appreciate, especially adding China, India, the climate issue as well. Justine, what do you think are the themes that you want to pick up on that we talked about? Any of them that you want to add to?
I think something that I hope is becoming very clear and apparent from the discussion that we're having here is, I think for the past 20 years, the US and the West was engaging in Afghanistan to empower women using a lot of quotas and, gender mainstreaming and a lot of kind of development and technical terms that led to kind of what I would say was quite a superficial engagement in the one sense. But on the other, it provided these opportunities for the younger generation of Afghan women to have much more authentic engagement, dreams, education, skills to move the country forward. And the link between empowering women and countering terrorism and why the Taliban is so fixated at systematically erasing women from public space It's what Crystal said. It's what Miriam said. It's not just because, you know, it's Pashtun culture or it's Taliban religious ideology. It's to exert control and power over the society. And so I think from that lens, this issue of empowering women takes on a very new dimension and a very new meaning. And that urgency that we're just not seeing in DC, unfortunately. I just want to briefly touch on some of the points that General Alizai raised. So I'm someone who I actually spent the majority of my career in East Africa and the Horn. Al-Shabaab, for instance, was just recently praised in the most recent issue of an Al-Qaeda publication for their struggle. And it pains me to see some DC think tanks and policy institutes that are similarly advancing that we should have dialogue and engagement with Al-Shabaab. They just did a 30-hour attack on one of the key hotels in Mogadishu that hosted a lot of the security leadership and injured hundreds of people, killed. I'm not sure what the total figures were, but somewhere around 40, 50 casualties in a 30-hour siege. So, you know, taking the example of Afghanistan and then learning the wrong lessons and then replicating that elsewhere, that to me speaks to a broader foreign policy failure in Washington. And so how do we start to address and reconcile these uncomfortable issues? What do we have in terms of policy going forward if we don't want American boots on the ground, even though we've just redeployed US Special Forces in Somalia? What are the other tools that we can use? And is there even a willingness to engage honestly with these complex places? You know, even the work that APW is doing, where we're using these on-the-ground networks to generate information, it's challenging because people don't want to support organizations that take risks to collect data in dangerous places. So it's kind of like this vicious catch-22 cycle that we're in. We don't have the right information, and then policy decisions are being made in vacuums that are completely decoupled from the lessons learned in one context to another. And so, yeah, I think we have a mountain to climb in terms of learning the lessons from Afghanistan, addressing the current issues in Afghanistan, and strengthening US foreign policy in other areas where we're frankly losing significant ground to Russia and China. And that's deeply concerning, I think, for all of us in this room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, really a powerful set of ideas to think about. I think it's good that we have the opportunity in these working groups that are coming up to look for any tools, and that's the right word. What tools do we have? I think if we agree on what the problem is, which is a consensus is really emerging, then we have to find the tools to deal with it. And Crystal, thank you. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and if possible, any extra thoughts you may have about the role of Afghans outside the country.
Yes, I think right now those Afghans who are outside of Afghanistan, they can play a vital role in shaping a policy because I believe that Taliban cannot last for a long time. We need to be prepared for post-Taliban, and I want to ask for what I'm working on. So I'm working with the women, with the activists. We need to support, we need to engage the organization that they work for with civil society. And we need to engage these organizations inside of Afghanistan to support these women. And obviously some people say like, well, 20 years we didn't bring any, it was a waste. We can't see any changes in the life of, it wasn't a waste in Afghanistan, this investment. You can go and see that the women, how resilient they become. We didn't have these women in 1997. When the first time Taliban came, everyone was silent in their home, and they didn't show any resistance against the women, against the Taliban. And 20 years was not too much long time for not only for women, for all Afghans. For white women, it took 100 years to get the right to vote. But for us, we had only 20 years. Within 20 years, we built a lot of achievements. And my message today is that we shouldn't let the Taliban destroy these achievements. We need a quick action against the Taliban, and we should support who are inside of Afghanistan. I don't want these new generations should again have the same story that I have gone through. They should fight again within their family and then community and to get the right to education. The Taliban are now planning to indoctrinate and brainwash these kids to be a Talib for the future. We shouldn't allow this. We should prevent this. We should take action against these plans that the Taliban are taking. And those women, recently we opened, I think, the best tools that we can fight against the Taliban is education, because the reason of the failure in Afghanistan, I don't think that it was corruption, because for me it's unacceptable. It's my personal view that we handed to the terrorist group, because the statement that this leadership, US leadership, government is making, that corruption, you can't punish 40 million population because of 10,000 corrupted administrators. So I think the education is very important inside of Afghanistan, and we diaspora, we need to support the women who are working on education plans inside of Afghanistan. Support them. They want to open schools, online classes, wherever you have access to these resources. Do not hesitate to connect them with the people inside of Afghanistan. As the Taliban closed all school doors, we need to open the doors for these girls and women. If you know the sources right now technology is very progressed, and they can have remote job. Those women who cannot have access and work inside of Afghanistan, there are so many companies that they hire remotely. We can just support the women and the people, not women, maybe men who are unable to work inside of Afghanistan, connect them with these opportunities. There are lots of things to do, but don't hesitate to support them. Be a voice for those who cannot raise their voice inside of Afghanistan. Just help them in any means that you can, whether in terms of education, humanitarian aids, or whatever it is. Thank you so much, everyone.
And in fact, there was a question from the audience, which you have already answered, which is what can be done. And I think that's a couple of very tangible and important ways, help women who are trying to revive education and counteract indoctrination, which is going to be, that's something that I mentioned as one of the urgent problems that we're facing. Well, General, I think we're close to time, but I want to give you the chance now. We've talked about these themes. What are some of the additional thoughts that you have?
Thank you again. I would like to say that Afghanistan is a country that geopolitically, no one can ignore it. Economically, it's a very wealthy country. That all the great power competition Afghanistan is part of that, especially in that region, Russia, China. Already Russians are tying deals with the Taliban. The Chinese are tying deals on mines and different businesses. So it's happening. Historically, Afghanistan is in fight for the last 45 years. And many terrorist groups have had their, they were active in Afghanistan for quite a long time. So it's security-wise, it's a problem that need to be fixed. So Afghanistan can't be ignored. It has to be fixed, and I think the U.S. has to take active part fixing this problem with us together. Because who we are not terrorists. We are not Taliban. And we were not corrupt as well. We were not those corrupt leaders who led U.S., same as Taliban and terrorists led U.S. to a failure in Afghanistan. We are the investment of 2,400 American soldiers killed in action, 23,000 wounded in action, 100,000 Afghan soldiers killed in action, more than 100,000 Afghan soldiers wounded in action. I'm not talking about civilians killed. I'm not talking about the widows in both sides, US, Afghan side. I'm not talking about their kids, families. So we own Afghanistan. We want to fix Afghanistan problem. After 45 years, it's the Afghans' right to have a good life, a peaceful life. In the meantime, the solution should be that we should focus still on a peace settlement as first option. That declares the difference between those who love Afghanistan and its people and those who doesn't love. Taliban started fighting post-2001 first, and then they pretended to have some peace negotiations. Means they didn't want a peace negotiation. But right now, all those Afghans who love Afghanistan should push for the peaceful settlement of Afghanistan first. Because if we go with a fight to Afghanistan, it will create more and more resistances in the future. There was a fight there was a resistance against the Najib's regime. There was a resistance against the Mujahideen. There was a resistance against I've seen these. I'm not talking about 45 years. I've seen such things. There was a resistance against Taliban in last term. There was a resistance against us. There is a resistance today against Taliban. And it will give birth to another resistance if we choose the fight as a first option for Afghans. Regardless of, I'm so comfortable with fighting than talking to such people. But we love Afghanistan, and that should happen. How can we do that? How can we fix this? There's no opposition against the Taliban that Taliban should take it seriously right now. There's 40 groups of people, 50 groups of people. Individually, they are pretending to be opposition against the Taliban. And this not forming is giving a chance and opportunity to Taliban to govern more, to have a longer life. So this formation has to come together here in US, in Europe, outside Afghanistan. Inside Afghanistan, there is no chance for people to raise their voice, as the panelists just mentioned. Second thing, if this doesn't work, Afghanistan will go to the civil war. Afghanistan will go to a split, because right now we have indications of an Afghanistan that will be 3 Afghanistans if we don't take some serious actions. I don't want to go to Mazar-e-Sharif with a visa, honestly. I am sure none of the young blood who is here and they're Afghans, they don't want that. So let's fix this problem. Let's fix it together. Afghans has to become reunite. They have to form a position against the Taliban. Then we can talk. If the talk doesn't work, then it will be much easier to even go with fighting. My fear is if today we go to Kabul, which is easy taking Kabul from Afghanistan, even in such situation, with very less resources, but how can we share Kabul between ourselves? That's a problem. We need to solve that. Afghanistan has to be fixed and we have solutions for that. We have ANDSF left behind in Afghanistan. 60% of them are doing nothing. 10% has already joined Taliban. 5% of them joined the other terrorist groups and some resistances. The 10% has fled to Iran and Pakistan and Tajikistan. The rest has fled to the Western world. Those soldiers who are in Afghanistan, that could be used not to become enemies of ourselves. Iranians has clearly told to our soldiers that if you want your visas to be extended, you have to go to a war in Yemen and fight against the US interest in there. And you know that there are 20 years experience, special forces, commandos, Delta. And they know everything about US tactics, techniques, and everything that is tied to the air and ground coordinations. So how bad that will look first, that your friend is fighting against your interest in another country. So the same way, the investment of last 20 years, everybody is trying to grab them. There is an appetite in international market for these people. Before, people just grab them from US because we have more emotional ties with US than just specific things. I have fought with all the elite units in Afghanistan against the terrorism, side by side. I have seen Mike, you can just Google it right now. The last American ODA S2 NCO was killed in Kunduz in 2019, December. One mission before, I was with him in Chardara. This was the last killed in combat. I'm not talking about 13 Marines down last year. That's a different story. Mike Spann, the first CIA who was killed in Afghanistan. So it's so emotional. If US is not interested in Afghanistan anymore, they have to tell us. Believe me, last year, none Afghans wanted to go to US, UK, or wherever. And I have been facing a narrative in the last 5-6 years, especially from some of our US friends, like, don't you think the Taliban are representing the majority of the population? I was saying no. But now I can tell you, if today US announces, as a joke, that we will bring all Afghans to US, no one will live there. You know why? Because they are fed up with Taliban. It means the Taliban are not representing the Afghan community and majority. It's us. It's us. So work with us, help us. We want to go back to Afghanistan, by peace or by fight, at the end of the day. We're not going to stay. But before anybody else uses us, it will be very good that US take advantage of us, that we seek advantage in US, and US should take advantage in us. Thank you very much. I won't take your time, but in the groups we will talk more brief about this.
We are, I think, out of time, my timekeeper, but you've got some access to these brilliant, amazing, and courageous people. I'm sorry.
Okay, folks, we're going to break now for lunch. I need to talk to the working group leaders. We told everybody when they checked in this morning to get a card and submit a written question. That's how we were working the conference. So sorry if you didn't register and get that message. Working group leaders, we'll talk to you in a little bit. If you have any questions, the food is up on the fourth floor, which is where the majority of the working groups are. We've got a slide on that as well that explains where the working group rooms are, if we can flip to that slide. But enjoy your lunch and then break off into your working groups that were assigned when you registered, and we're going to work through that. We'll meet back in here after the working groups. So thanks for this morning. Thanks to the panel.